I call to order the City Council Special Study Session. Call to order the City Council Special Study Session. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Martinez.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Pats.
Here.
Vice Mayor Bowders.
Here.
And Mayor Donahue.
Here. Approval of the final agenda for this meeting.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowders, seconded by Councilmember Pats. Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders.
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Ex parte communications about this study session.
I met with Tamiko Johnson with the county.
I also spoke with Tamiko Johnson.
As I did.
I did as well, as well as residents. I don't know if that counts, but yeah.
I'll
Any
make it a
residents.
consensus, we met as well.
5.1, the study session itself.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I'm here tonight to give you your presentation on the study session. So I'm going to try and be brief so we can move on to questions and any deliberations you might have. But if you have any questions, please let me know. So tonight's presentation is going to go over prior council direction because the last time I was in front of the council on smoking, it was with the prior council. We'll go over community input, questions and comments received since the staff report published, and then questions for council's consideration. At the prior council meeting, staff had presented two questions. First was, should all smoke be treated in the same manner? Specifically, should tobacco smoke and cannabis smoke be treated the same? And then the second question was, should smoking in all unit housing be treated in the same manner? Oops, that didn't delete. Basically, should smoking in rental housing be treated the same as condominiums? And ultimately, council decided that they didn't have enough information regarding what the community preference was to answer those questions. So they directed staff to work with the housing committee to determine what community preferences were. The council also indicated that it was concerned about the fiscal impact of enforcement if the ordinance was broadened. And so staff partnered with Alameda County Public Health Department Tobacco Control Program, I just call it the Department of Health, to obtain assistance with the community survey and outreach. And basically what happened was that Department of Health came up with a survey. It was emailed. City staff emailed it out to all of our contacts for both HOAs and large residential so that they could then forward it on to their residents and the residents could take the survey. And so Department of Health compiled all that information, and the results from that were published in the staff report, and Tamiko Johnson is here to answer any further questions about the survey since it was conducted by Department of Health. And ultimately, the Housing Committee found that the survey results indicated community preference to have all multi-unit housing that is free from all secondhand smoke, regardless of type of smoke. And in addition, going through this process, the Department of Health has indicated a willingness to partner with the city to facilitate enforcement of the ordinance. And so we'll come back to that piece a little bit later in the presentation. And so the ordinance presented in your packet is the result of the community survey and input. And also, staff has communicated with Change Lab, which is a nonprofit group, which provides technical assistance on public health issues such as secondhand smoke. And so the ordinance reflects that. But since the packet has published, we've had additional questions and comments, some from council members and some from the Department of Health. And so the first question that's been received is, will smoking cannabis be allowed at a cannabis dispensary? And the answer is yes, if certain requirements are met. State law puts requirements on when you can have on-site consumption of cannabis. And then in addition, our local regulations provide that the dispensary their conditional use permit has to allow for smoking. And so that is because we can address, I know there's a debate about this, but ventilation where the smoking location is on the site to help minimize the impacts of secondhand smoke. So staff's recommendation would be to revise Section 5-2907F to include a reference to state law, just to make that clear that we are allowing on-site consumption if it meets certain requirements. The second question is, does state law prohibit smoking in the public right-of-way? So ultimately, what the ordinance proposes is that people can smoke in the public right-of-way. The idea being that smokers have a place to go and that they are generally walking and smoking, so no one person is subjected to the secondhand smoke for any long period of time. So that is the best practice that the Department of Public Health has put forward, as well as Change Lab. And so ultimately, the ordinance was crafted to think, okay, you can smoke tobacco and cannabis. However, the state law is much murkier than that. And it actually, the consensus is that Prop 64 is being interpreted to prohibit the smoking of cannabis, even though it doesn't actually use the words prohibited. That's how it's being interpreted. And it's prohibiting the smoking of cannabis in all public places, and public places would include the public right-of-way. And so because of this intersection between Prop 64 and our ordinance, and after speaking with Change Lab, we're going to recommend that there be a new section stating cannabis prohibition under state law, and then make a few other tweaks so that the city is going to be regulating tobacco and smoke from nicotine. And then what we're going to state in the ordinance is that cannabis smoke is prohibited in all of these other places pursuant to state law. And the reason why is because under our ordinance, we're going to allow smoking of tobacco smoke in the public right-of-way, and under state law, we can't allow cannabis smoke. So that's why we have to divorce the two a little bit. And so then, do you have a question?
I do. I'm hoping you'll finish.
Okay. So then the question becomes, well, where could somebody who wants to smoke cannabis smoke cannabis? And these are the options that have been identified, and this is both in speaking with Department of Public Health and also Change Lab, that multi-unit households can create smoking spaces provided they meet certain requirements, and that's already in our ordinance. They could visit a dispensary that allows for on-site consumption. And then what cities are doing is making enforcement of the prohibition against cannabis smoke in the public right-of-way the lowest enforcement priority. So basically, if the police department has absolutely nothing else to do, and I don't think that happens very often, then if they get a complaint about somebody smoking cannabis in the public right-of-way, the police department would enforce state law, because it's a state law, but it's our local police department that enforces that state law. So I'm going to stop there for a minute. Any questions?
I do. Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
can you go back one slide?
Yes.
So I'm not sure I followed the first bullet point. The consensus is yes. Prop 64 is interpreted as prohibiting this. Like, what are you relying on?
I am relying on, oh, did I not bring them? It's Health and Safety Code, section 113. you in a minute. It is 11362.3. And the language, what the ordinance set, or sorry, what the statute says is that, let me back up a minute. So 11362.3 of the Health and Safety Code, point 1, gives individuals the right to smoke cannabis. So you have this right. However, 11362.3 comes in and says, no, there's some parameters on that right. And so what they say is that 11362.1 does not permit people to go smoke cannabis wherever smoking tobacco is prohibited. So for example, Prop 64, we prohibit smoking inside these chambers, right? Prop 64 did not give anybody the right to come in and smoke cannabis in these chambers. However, Prop 64 also says that the smoking of cannabis is prohibited in public places. And so then there's this idea of, well, is the public right-of-way a public place, or is it a different place because it's the public right-of-way? In our ordinance, the public right-of-way is called out separately from the public place, but under state law, given the line of cases that interpret public intoxication and disorderly conduct, it's the consensus among the experts, and I'm talking with Change Lab, is that public place is interpreted to include the public right-of-way.
Is there any reason why we don't just say both then? Because your bottom recommendation is to scrap it and then to just make a reference to state law. Why wouldn't we just do both? Public right-of-way and public place. Why wouldn't we just call out both in the statute?
In our ordinance? I could raise that with Change Lab. They're assisting with these technical amendments and sort of best practice, and then also this kind of rolls into jumping ahead a little bit, and we're partnering with Department of Health for enforcement, so we could take that under consideration. But given this interplay with Prop 64 and potential, I guess, preemption issues, but the idea would be we simply call out cannabis in one area and leave the regulations of smoking to govern tobacco and nicotine. The package together prohibits both tobacco and cannabis smoke.
In the public right-of-way or in a public place?
Except for the public right-of-way, in Emeryville, tobacco and cannabis smoke would be treated the same. They would be prohibited. In the public right-of-way, under local law, tobacco smoke would be allowed. Under state law, it's still prohibited. That's the distinction.
And cannabis would be what? In the public right-of-way?
It would be prohibited, and then the way we allow for it to happen in the public right-of-way is that we simply don't enforce the state law prohibition.
So my other question is about that last point, which is how do we avoid claims of discriminatory impact?
Between smoke?
No, between if we are calling out that we are going to give low priority to enforcing in the public right-of-way, right, which is what I just heard you say for cannabis, how do we ensure that we are protecting visitors and residents from being discriminatorily targeted for enforcement of an ordinance that or a provision that we don't? I mean, like, it seems weird to call out that we're going to just low prioritize it.
We wouldn't call it out in the ordinance. That wouldn't be an appropriate place to call out your enforcement priorities. The city all the time takes enforcement priorities. For example, I'm sure the chief could give better examples, but if you get a call and there's a robbery in progress, that's going to take priority over a complaint that, of smoking. So it's just it's the priority of staff's work, and that happens throughout all enforcement priorities and really all city business.
I have a technical question. It says that for tobacco smoke, you have to be 25 feet away from a doorway or entryway, but does that also include a window of any kind?
No, but it should. And that's an adjustment we can make.
This also might make it impractical to smoke in certain blocks where there are windows right on a building, even on the second floor, because that would be less than 25 feet. So the practical side of that is that it would prohibit smoking on most sidewalks in residential multifamily housing areas, but would potentially allow it in maybe industrial areas or something like that.
Could you speak to the microphone?
That so this is, you know, a little bit of an issue. If you know, we maybe should look at that as an issue. It might mean that tobacco smoke can only be smoked in a few areas of Emeryville if there are windows as a part of that parameter. And maybe that's okay. I'm just saying that it's potentially an issue.
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you've talked to us many times about the Cole memo, which which Deputy Attorney General James Cole wrote to, in essence, deprioritize federal actions against marijuana use or dealings in marijuana, even though it was a schedule drug that is not legal to use on the federal level. So is there something on the local level that municipalities can do to memorialize deprioritization of smoking in the right of way?
I believe there is, and that is something that we would work with Department of Health in kind of coming up with protocols for enforcement, which would be, once we have a good understanding of what the ordinance is, then we would move forward, and the council agrees, we'd move forward with partnering with him and coming up with that protocol.
Okay.
Should I continue on?
Yes.
Question received, does the ordinance prohibit either aerosols or barbecues? And the answer is no. The proposed ordinance does not regulate odors. Barbecues and aerosols are not intended for human inhalation, although some aerosols may be intended to mask the odor. And because they're not intended for human inhalation, they're not considered the smoke that we're regulating here. And so we've also received some comments. There was a comment to include an amendment to also prohibit the smoking of synthetic materials. So, for example, the smoking, if they're moving forward, the products are changing so quickly. So if they come up with some sort of synthetic tobacco, you couldn't smoke the synthetic tobacco because you can't smoke the actual tobacco. And this is an amendment that I received the comment and I started looking into it, and it's proving to be a little bit more complicated than I initially thought, and it's something that if the council gives direction on it, I would work with Change Lab to take advantage of their technical assistance on these types of issues. There's also a proposal to prohibit smoking at public events, including those events that may be located in the public right-of-way. So sometimes we shut down a street for some sort of event, and in that case, you couldn't be smoking in the public right-of-way because there was a public event going on. And so if council agrees with the proposed amendments, we would revise the proposed ordinance accordingly and consult with Change Lab. And then also, Department of Health has some comments as well. They are looking more towards the next step, which would be developing some enforcement protocols if the City Council gives direction to partner with them for enforcement. And they would be requesting provisions that landlords are to include certain model no smoking lease terms in new and renewed rental agreements. And then landlords and HOAs alert residents to the new smoke-free requirements. And we would simply work with Department of Health to further revise the ordinance to include those if the council agrees. And so questions for council's consideration tonight is, does the draft ordinance reflect the community preferences as evidenced by the survey results? And as I mentioned, Tamiko Johnson from the Department of Public Health is here to speak to the survey if you have any questions on that. Would the City Council be interested in partnering with Department of Health to facilitate enforcement of the proposed ordinance? That would certainly help ease the fiscal impact on city resources for enforcement. And does the City Council agree with the staff recommendations that I just discussed based on questions and comments received? And are there any other comments or directions? I've noted that the mayor has just brought up the issue about whether smoking should also be prohibited in front of windows or just doorways and entryways. And with that, questions?
I just have one more
clarifying
question. The prior slide, you talked about info on no smoking terms for leases. Offhand, do we know if the landlord-tenant ordinance provides explicitly that a person making a complaint on the basis of an infraction of our smoking ordinance, which I doubt it contemplated at the time we drafted it, you can't evict someone for making complaints, the harassment provisions is what I'm getting at. Do we have that as a protected area? Or is a landlords do, especially in subsidized units, evict people who complain about smoking. And so that should be included in the landlord-tenant ordinance, potentially called out if it's not currently called out.
I don't recall specifically whether that is or not, but if it's not, then we can, if it requires an ordinance amendment, but the City Council also authorized the city manager to adopt regulations to provide clarity to some of the broader terms that are used in the ordinance. So if it generally prohibits retaliation, we can specify something like that.
Thank you. That's my only question.
My understanding from the staff report is that there's just simply not really any evidence that there is smoke pollution from cannabis consumption that negatively affects other people besides the user.
Well, there was an attachment from the State Department of Health, which included information about negative impacts from cannabis smoke. Because cannabis is a Schedule I substance, there is not the same level of research as you see with tobacco. But the idea being that it's still, you're inhaling a combustible substance, and that has an adverse impact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sitting by a fireplace and inhaling, that's bad for you
Yes.
as well, yes. But I'm saying that this ordinance seems targeted towards secondhand smoke protection.
Yes.
And there's just not any evidence that there's a lot of secondhand cannabis smoke that's drifting into people's houses and negatively affect. Can you speak to that a little bit, maybe?
So this is Serena Chen coming from the Department of Public Health, and she is specifically working with cities in dealing with both tobacco and cannabis smoke.
Fantastic.
Hi, good evening. I actually worked with your previous council on the original secondhand smoke ordinance in 2005 or 6. And at that time, you were the state-of-the-art ordinance. Times keep changing. But your question was about secondhand cannabis smoke.
Yes.
The state of California has ruled that it is a toxic air contaminant. It's listed on the Prop Prop 65 as known toxins known to cause cancer in humans, because something like, 44 components of secondhand cannabis smoke are also in secondhand tobacco smoke.
Okay, so secondhand cannabis smoke has been is in Prop 64?
65, which is the California Toxins Act.
Yes.
Okay.
So that would put it in a situation where someone could actually sue someone else for exposing them.
Okay.
Just
Sure, we'll be seeing the first of those lawsuits to come soon.
But I just have to say, I spent 25 years denormalizing tobacco use. And when you look at the statistics as to the youth rate, over the years, the youth rate has gone down, not because we told them not to smoke, not because we did anything. Everything that we did was aimed at denormalizing tobacco use. So as a public health advocate, my fear is the normalization of another product, which potentially has some of the same harms as the product I just spent 25 years stuffing back into the pop-up box.
I totally understand. I just, appreciate the evidence that you're bringing forth into this, because I really don't know much about the effects of secondhand cannabis smoke, because it's something that's not as well researched.
And then for 25 years, I was taking complaints from tenants over the phone about secondhand smoke. And for the tenants mainly coming from Emeryville and Oakland, they also, over half of them also said they're smoking cannabis or marijuana too. So the complaints were coming in. It's just as insidious. And, people were complaining about, having their children exposed and things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to get some input from the public.
Public comment?
Yes.
I'm so excited. Okay.
Could you turn the microphone
I
up?
will.
I'm having a hard time hearing. Perfect, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. My name is Ron Freund. I live in the Watergate complex. It seems like 10 years ago when Serena, Shannon, and I helped promote the adoption of the city's first comprehensive smoking ordinance. Maybe that's because it was 10 years ago, and none of you were on the council at that time. By the way, windows are specifically included in the ordinance. So,
Okay.
52911A. So while that ordinance has been a great success, it still could be improved, like many laws. So I'm just going to outline my ideas for how the proposed draft could be improved or strengthened. First, I do support the addition of exclusive use areas within multi-unit residences. It's been one of the big problems at Watergate since we exempted balconies from the law in 2006-07, and residents are constantly complaining about the drifting of secondhand smoke up to their units from neighbors. And I support requiring this as a specific provision of all new leases and making it effective on current ones within a reasonable time frame, let's say 6 months or the next renewal time. Secondly, given that hotels around the world are moving successfully toward smoke-free facilities, I would suggest phasing in 100% smoke-free hotel policy. And short of that, certainly making the rule apply to floors and not just rooms. You could have 8 out of 10 rooms be smoke-free. The other 2 you could have smoking. Hallway's a mess. I mean, I think any of us can see that. Thirdly, I suggest explicitly adding bus and EGR shuttle stop areas to the list of prohibited public places, including the placement of no smoking signs at the location. I drove by several stops today, and there's nothing posted, even though there's a reference in the ordinance to service lines. I think that's too vague, and a lot of people don't want to wait in a line where there's other people smoking. Distance. I would like to see us move toward a 50-foot distance, given that many public and private buildings are now prohibiting smoking within 50 feet of entrances. And I've seen this in other countries as well. The last part is on enforcement, which I find very confusing. If in fact sections D and E specifically prohibit, are you going to enforce it? Give me a minute.
Can you pass it off to someone?
No, I'll be real fast.
All right, go ahead.
I'll be real fast. Prohibit any enforcement actions. I don't understand how this ordinance is going to be implemented. We can't rely on the city manager, I don't think. And the staff report on fiscal impact actually addresses this in detail and should simply replace that section on enforcement. And I think that would be a major improvement. So finally, if secondhand smoke is a major health hazard, let's treat it like one. And then this will be one repeal and replace law that we can all support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Farrell. I live at Watergate, and I helped start, along with other citizens from our community, a resident oversight group, and one of the major complaints was the smoke. I'm a owner of over 20 years, and there have been many renters under me, above me, and beside me, and they did allow the smoking on the balconies. It comes right in my place. I go to sleep, I wake up in the middle of the night, the downstairs person is smoking marijuana. I'm not against marijuana. Let them eat a brownie in the middle of the night instead of smoking it. It wakes me up. I have asthma. I have to have oxygen to breathe at night. This is not a little thing for me. I almost died last year. And my friends here kept me alive. But my neighbor smokes. My dad smoked, probably one of the reasons why I have lung problems. This is really serious, and we've heard it from many, many of our community members. Not near windows, not on balconies. There can be a common place, perhaps, where they can go, but please, not where the rest of us have to breathe. Thank you very much.
My name is Vicki Jennings. I'm a Watergate resident. I'm really here on behalf of my daughter, who has a similar problem of having a bad case of asthma. Now, she lives in a junior one-bedroom. On the 4th floor, we've got someone chronically smoking right down below her in sort of like a courtyard area. He's always out there smoking. So the comment to her was, if we get enough complaints, we're going to take him to the council meeting and they're going to hit him with the fine. She's heard that so many times. She puts in about 3 complaints a week. It doesn't go anywhere. And during those hot days that we've had, she can't open her windows because of the smoke that just billows up. I mean, smoke goes up, right? So it goes directly into her place. And I just don't know what to do about it. I don't know what she can do about it. So I'm just wondering if there's some way that cigarettes smoking can be isolated to certain areas, or people just have to smoke in their units. That's my question. What can we do about it? Thank you.
I'm back. I just wanted to mention that I worked on the first ban on smoking in multi-unit housing in 2007, and it got international attention. And now 40 cities have adopted 100% smoke-free multi-unit housing laws in California. So over 2.5 million people now live in cities where smoking is banned in all multi-unit housing. Having said that, I live in a condo in a city where smoking is banned, and my upstairs neighbor smokes. And what I've discovered over the years is that the smoke-free housing laws are only as good as the residents themselves are willing to enforce it. Because there's no way the police can come and break down my neighbor's front door to catch her smoking in the middle of the night. So I would love to help craft out a whole series of protocols for condo associations to try to put some teeth into this law so that everyone takes some responsibility for getting the smoke out of people's homes, because that's been kind of the weak link. When you live in an apartment building, you have an apartment manager, the owner can be held responsible. But when you live in a condo association, some of the people rent out, and they're not controlling their tenants, they're absentee. So there's all these crazy stuff happening, and that's where people are suffering the most. So I pledge to help put together a CID kind of type of protocols that perhaps we can incorporate into the ordinance so that the Watergate folks can find some relief. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. I wanted to address council member Medina's questions around secondhand marijuana smoke. My colleague Liz Williams is here from Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights. They have 2 great handouts about the evidence around that issue. And I've also provided to the city attorney's office a stack of studies about secondhand tobacco and marijuana smoke. So I'm happy to make sure that all of you receive that if you're interested.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Okay, let's give staff some direction.
Would you like me to just go through the, yes, please, the slides? Well, I guess let's start with the first question. Do you think that the ordinance overall reflects the community preferences as indicated by the survey conducted by the Department of Public Health?
Yes.
Mostly.
So with that threshold question, the first question is, should the ordinance be revised to include a reference to state law regarding dispensaries?
Yes.
I agree.
So, can I get clarification on this? Are you saying that state law allows people to smoke in a dispensary?
It does if certain conditions are met, if the dispensary meets certain requirements.
What are those?
It is the site, you have to restrict access to the area of smoking to persons aged 21 and older. The smoking cannot be visible from any public place, and there can't be any sale of alcohol or tobacco.
So I have only 2 concerns with this whole thing, and one of them is what if a dispensary is located on the ground floor of a multi-unit mixed-use building? So you're saying that if a dispensary operates there, that it would trump our no smoking ordinance, and so the residents who live above would have no choice but to live with that?
If the site complied with the state law that I just described, and they had a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission that would allow for the smoking of cannabis on site, then yes.
But we get to define what the parameters of the conditional use permit are, correct?
That would be the Planning Commission.
And there's, one of the conditions for the area is a ventilation system as well, correct?
In general, when a cannabis business is going through the CUP process, ventilation will be considered.
Yeah.
Does the Department of Public Health agree with all this? Can you come up? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because my concern is that a resident who lives in a building that has a ground floor retail space that gets rented would potentially be then just permanently subjected to that. Is that your understanding as well?
That's my understanding. I've talked to Andrea and I think all of you about, we are really hoping that any dispensaries that are allowed in the city of Emeryville are in a standalone building, not attached to multi-unit housing. So if that's the Planning Commission's decision on putting those requirements in the conditional use permit, that would be great if that could be codified there. Yeah. So I agree with you, Councilmember Bowders. I'm not interested in having a dispensary attached to a multi-unit complex because there is no ventilation system on the market today that can prevent that smoke from traveling. So,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would just like to add, maybe hoping to catch Charlie's ear about this. Yes, sir. That air handling and ventilation really is specified in all kinds of industrial applications, and even restaurant air handling is pretty specified. Our biotech industries, they know how to do ventilation. The one-story cannabis dispensary next to a 5-story multifamily housing complex wouldn't really help if the smoke is just drifting right up to the people right next door. You know, if it's, whereas if here's an example that's sort of saying that design matters, that the first floor multifamily housing rented out to a cannabis place that allows smoking, but they have ventilation that meets standards of negative pressure. The smoking room, the light goes on, or as soon as any person goes in, there's negative pressure in the smoking room, and it rises up above a certain height at roof level that is that code. In other words, there are technical solutions to this problem that I think should be a part of the consideration of this, because I don't see anything but a technical solution to this.
I think that the Department of Health's position is there is no technical solution developed yet, if I'm correct. Whereas I think there might be individuals in the cannabis industry that may think that there are technical solutions that exist. So it's two policy objectives that the council has to balance. On the one hand, there's this public health policy concern around smoking that you're considering, and then on the other hand, as it relates to cannabis, the council has indicated that they would like on-site consumption, and that on-site consumption could be smoking. It also could be edibles. It could be topicals. We won't know because the cannabis RFQ is still out, and the council still has to select that one business who would be deemed qualified. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't really, there's competing interests and technical expertise out there.
Andrew, can you talk about the timing as to when you expect this would come back as compared with when that RFQ process is supposed to be complete, so we know, so
Yes.
we understand where we'll be in both processes?
Yes. So assuming that the council gives me direction tonight, then what I would do is I'd go back and revise, and some of the proposed amendments are pretty technical, and I'd want to work with both the Department of Health and also with Change Lab. And so as a practical matter, I'd be thinking early 2018, like maybe February or so. So at that point, we would know what the on-site consumption is going to look like. Mm-hmm. Because right now we are scheduled to come to the council on November 21st, where the council will consider the various cannabis applicants and decide which one will be deemed qualified. And so you'll know at that time whether it's going to be the on-site consumption is smoking or edibles or topicals or, I don't know, something else.
I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I forgot to say that you all could put some language in this ordinance around not allowing for smoke from kind of a retail space below a multi-unit housing property, but it's not in competition with the RP that you already have out. It's just, I don't know who is applying for that and whether or not they've already selected a building, but it is your prerogative to make that space smoke-free if it's connected to multi-unit housing. You can do that in this ordinance.
Your answer? What you thought?
I'm ready to move on.
I'm supportive, in light of all the answers, I'm supportive of this, but I'm now interested in, I have an interest in doing that, I think, if that's the case. But
Okay.
yeah, I understand the need to do this.
So, yes, we're going to move forward with that recommendation. The state law prohibits smoking in the public right-of-way, and this is really simply kind of tweaking the ordinance a little bit to pull out smoking of tobacco and smoking of cannabis. These are really what I would call form amendments. The overall substance is still the prohibition of smoking of tobacco and cannabis. It would take a slightly different form to account for the state law. And this is something that we'd also work with Change Lab on for best practices.
Seems reasonable.
I hear one.
My question is, we received information from the Department of Public Health. We get a 0 for sidewalks, so do we not adequately regulate smoking in the public right-of-way? She's saying we don't, so, my understanding is that you're saying there's a state law against it. Is that what you're saying?
The state law would prohibit smoking of cannabis in the public right-of-way.
But not cigarettes?
No.
I see, so this is for tobacco, okay.
Yeah, I think to address the bus stop comment from earlier, the bus stop I use every morning, we actually put up a but vote system. And so it almost encourages smoking at the stop. I see Chad laughing at this because I think he knows the stop. Forgotten about that, but yeah, we actually have, and it's amusing to me because the butts are all on the floor in front of it, so it's not quite working in the intended way, but I felt the question wasn't drawing enough. But yeah, so when we talk about this smoking in the public right-of-way, it's something I think we should address. So.
Yeah, I like the idea of adding shuttle stops to be smoke-free in our city. It just seems minimum civilization it's a drag to.
I support that.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The same thing with the 25 versus 50 feet. With a good sense of distance, I'm trying to think of any of the bus stops I've used are less than 50 feet away from an entrance or window in Emeryville, and I cannot come up with one. I take that back. I've got the one that's across the street from Bay Street on the freeway side. That's the only thing I can think of that's more than 25 feet away from a door and an entrance. So just it goes back to the enforcement piece. So go ahead.
So we're good with the 25-foot distance still?
Is there a reason 25 feet was shown? Is it because that is state law in some context?
That.
My colleagues.
Can you do it in the microphone so the people at home can hear you?
The city of Oakland was the first city in the Alameda County to pass a law like this, so they said 25 feet. And then later, the state passed a law saying you couldn't smoke within 20 feet of a government building. But Oakland just has stuck to their 25 feet, and when Emeryville was given a choice way back 10 years ago, Emeryville says, well, what is it, 20, 25? And we said, Oakland's 25, and everybody else is 20. He says, well, we'll take 25. That's how the 25 emerged. Also, AC Transit has agreed, because almost all of our cities in Alameda County have smoke-free bus stop ordinances. AC Transit has agreed to put up a little no smoking button on their schedules, because every time they change their schedule, they have to print up a new schedule. So at least in all of your bus shelters, there'll be a no smoking sticker with the Emeryville code on it. So that at least gives someone standing, the opportunity to point at the little logo, and usually that works. Usually, so that's a plus. So all we do is call AC Transit and tell them what the municipal code is and send it to them, and they incorporate it as they roll out their new, but for your private shelters, you might need your own signage. But 25 is because Emeryville wanted to be as good as Oakland.
I wanted to clarify, you held up the ALA report card a few minutes ago. So state law is what governs the public right-of-way in terms of cannabis, but local municipalities, cities can pass laws to say you're not allowed to smoke tobacco, because that form is about tobacco, on the sidewalks. And we talked a little bit before about, we're not a big fan of the sidewalk law. Oftentimes it's used, it has been used in Hayward to corral the homeless and harass the homeless. So we're not huge fans of that.
Thank
You'll
you for
kind of
that.
see that on the report card. Not too many cities have addressed that.
Thank you for that.
So going back to the public right-of-way, what I'm hearing from the council is that they would like to prohibit smoking near the shuttle stops and a buffer around shelters, bus shelters.
Yes.
Okay.
Can we notify, when we do this, can we notify the TMA that we're doing this? I attended their meeting a week ago, and they're in the process of actually redoing their schedule and bus printing, and so if we let them know, perhaps we can have that included on the Emeryville as well.
Okay. What's its question? Would you like the ordinance to be revised to include a prohibition on the smoking of synthetic counterparts?
So I brought this up, and I think it would be smart to do, because otherwise you're asking whoever's enforcing this to try to determine whether something's natural or synthetic. I think that's impossible.
You said something earlier that I really appreciated. You said the distinction between barbecues and this ordinance is the idea that it's intended to be taken internally. And so for me, instead of getting into listing all the possible things, because I've been around a long time, I'm always amazed at what people find to smoke. The list would be endless, so just making that distinction that if they're doing it for consumption. I don't know how to word that out, but that would be my direction.
So this one is one that I touched base briefly with ChangeLab on. And what's interesting is that there's a law that actually prohibits the smoking of synthetic cannabis materials, but not one for tobacco and nicotine. And so they seem to know a little bit about it, but would want to kind of consider it further before providing any technical assistance on that prohibition.
I support this.
I support it too, and then we can just rescind when the entire tobacco industry comes to our town to sue us into oblivion. What do you think?
Well,
An opinion about this,
No.
Andrea?
So the other comment was an amendment to prohibit smoking at public events, including those events that may be located in the public right-of-way.
And this item was my comment when I reviewed this. So I just noticed that in other cities, there is a provision to prohibit smoking at public events. So if we had an event, we closed the street for a kids festival, a bike event, whatever, it is technically in the right-of-way. And so even though we don't have to go out for the good reasons that were made and ban the public right-of-way, we could make venues where we have public events non-smoking, and I would be supportive of that.
Since almost all of our public events are child-focused, I think that's prudent.
Yeah. That seems good.
Okay. And then, so this comment raises the issue of whether the city council is interested in partnering with the Department of Public Health for enforcement. So we should answer that question first, probably, before getting to the second question.
I would say yes on this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, supported.
Okay.
Please.
And so with that, they're requesting some provisions that would facilitate the enforcement, especially as it relates to the multi-unit housing. And they may have some other minor edits related to enforcement to help that job.
Okay, Ron had a suggestion about hotels. The way the current ordinance is written, that his point is very good, that you could just have two people on 2 rooms puffing away, and then the other 8 rooms on the floor would be suffering. So that the typical hotel in Emeryville is cast concrete floors, and it makes so much architectural sense to have smoke-free floors.
The council could prohibit smoking altogether in hotels. It simply, the ordinance that I brought forward was our current ordinance, and I tried to work within those parameters and the direction that I had from the prior council. So there's no reason why you can't just simply prohibit smoking in hotels if that's what the council would like to do.
Okay, I'm a little concerned about the hotels for saying 100% because they are close to being our main source of income.
Okay.
We better be a little careful with this, but I think smoke-free floors,
Smoke-free floors.
they would easily adapt to, just thinking about it. It just seems like I think we could put that across the bow. And
Do most hotels not already do that as a matter of practice?
Can we ask the Department
Yeah.
of Public Health to come up and talk about that?
Liz Williams with Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights. Most major hotel brands now have a corporate smoke-free policy. The Marriott, the Westins, a large number of them. So it is the industry trend amongst the hotels themselves to already be smoke-free. So that wouldn't be terribly out of the norm. And there are a number of communities around the country, including a couple states, that do require 100% of their hotels to be require all of their hotels to be 100% smoke-free due to both the secondhand and third-hand smoke risk.
well, I guess I feel like I would be supportive of 100% smoke-free hotels, hearing that if we did a survey of our hotels and found out they were all smoke-free, then no problem.
Sort of feel like we're going to be alienating all of Europe with this one ordinance, losing those travel dollars. But it doesn't make any sense to me to have a smoke-free floor if the floor below it is a smoking floor. That's just not how smoke works. So, and I don't want to cede the top floor to smokers. So
I support 100% smoke-free hotels.
that was my lengthy way of saying just that.
Okay.
The Marriott's already there. Just Googled it.
I'm worried about Hyatt. I heard Marriott on her list, but
I am actually checking on Hyatt.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear back from the hotels before I throw my support. on this
In
one.
principle, are we supportive unless we hear a concern to pursue this, though?
What's that?
Are we in principle supportive of this unless we hear of a major concern?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All Hyatt Place hotels are smoke-free.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, the only smoking hotel I can think of isn't actually in Emeryville. It's the extended stay that allows smoking.
Carly, do our ordinances apply to the extended stay at the Bay Bridge Shopping Center?
No, that's in Oakland.
Okay.
Said that it wasn't, yeah.
Well, we have
I
the,
know-
we have
no,
the
I-
JPA, so I don't know
got
if
it.
any of our rules apply to that because it's in the JPA.
That is not in the JPA.
Oh, it's excluded?
It's not part of the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center.
Okay, great.
Okay, so on board with smoke-free hotels, provided there's no strong objection from hotels. That goes back to the comment here. Is the council on board with including some of the,
Can I,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I go back to the
Gotta wait, only the mayor can call someone back from public comment.
Yeah, we'll get to you, but first let's,
Yeah, I think we should put it in and notify the hotels, and if they want to come and speak, I think that's fine. But I'm not so worried about the corporate hotels, and I'm not thinking of any small hotels. I guess there's a couple of the motels on San Pablo and things. Those are the ones I'd be more curious to hear from. So,
We only have 5 regulated hotel motels in the city of Emeryville, is that correct? I believe we have 5.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
yeah, so, okay.
So just notify them of the upcoming
Yep,
council meeting? Is that what I'm hearing?
yep.
Sure.
That'd be my preference.
I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
it seems good.
So.
Okay, before we conclude, there's some more public input. that
She's
I-
not done with the,
Okay.
So for this comment right here, for the, include provisions in the ordinance that would require the landlords to include certain model no smoking lease terms, and also to require landlords and HOAs to alert residents to the new smoke-free requirements. Is the council interested in including these provisions?
For the first provision, is it specific language, or is there some flexibility there? Because I know where I'm staying currently, they have, there's no smoking allowed, but it's boilerplate language that is national, because of the chain that happens to manage the apartment that I'm staying in is national. So they use whatever the realtor template is. So I would just ask if there's some flexibility there, or if there's specific language that you wanted to see.
I think it's fine for them to use their own language as long as what's covered in the ordinance is included. So, this apartment or this condominium is required to be 100% smoke-free, including these areas, as long as it has the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can work with the city to provide a template. So as long as it includes that type of information.
Or a
I think that should
template
be okay.
addendum.
I'm sorry?
A template, excuse me, a template addendum.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can do that.
So is that a yes then?
yes.
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 And any other comments or direction?
I'd like to hear from the public once again before we get to this part.
Once again, I really like the idea of 100% free for the hotels. But can we just go a little bit further and think about the residents who are putting up with this stuff every single day? Why can't we go 100% smoke-free in the common areas of the condominiums?
We do. That's what it does.
Yeah.
That's the whole.
But who enforces it?
Well, we just asked the health department to help do that.
Okay, thank you.
Just 2 quick points. I think a way to thread the needle, if there is an objection from any of the hotels, is to simply give them a time frame by which they need to adopt the policy. So make it, 1 year from the date or something like that. Because it's clear that this is a trend worldwide. And wherever I'm going, I'm seeing more and more demand for 100% smoke-free. And it eliminates the whole hassle. So that's my suggestion on that one. I appreciate your taking it up. On the enforcement, I just think you need to clean up the language. And I hope you'll just kind of delete what's in there and add the partnering sections. Because you can't leave in a no enforcement clause and then have an enforcement provision. Does that make sense, Michael?
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi,
I'd just like to recommend that in addition to the working with the health department, to lay out what some of those enforcement steps might be in the language of the ordinance. We've seen other communities do that, and it helps both the residents as well as the landlords and HOAs, as well as the city, know exactly what will happen when a complaint is received. And that way, it's just written right there in the ordinance, and there's a number of examples of how communities have done that, but I think that would help address some of the enforcement concerns that people have raised.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask that public comment a question?
Yes.
I have a question. Do you have a city that has an enforcement mechanism written out, like you just said, that you recommend us to model?
Well, some different cities have chosen different means of enforcing. The primary one that most cities do include is specifically requiring, as you mentioned, having each resident sign a lease stating as such, but sometimes it is a fine or a process. City of Berkeley, for example, they have a multiple complaint process, so there's different options out there that can be utilized, but I think just encouraging you to put whatever you choose to do in the language of the ordinance itself can provide some good guidance.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Since my favorite area is condominiums, and we did this in Berkeley and in Alameda, we required that the smoke-free law, 100% smoke-free condominium law is in disclosures. So whenever a property is sold, it's in the disclosure, as well as all condominium owners required, if they would lease out their unit, to have a smoke-free lease, because these guys are wily. And also, as I said before, the condominium associations need to be on the team to set up their own in-house protocols, because they can't just be calling Emeryville police every time their neighbor is smoking. There should be a set of protocols that each association should follow. In the city of Richmond, for example, they had a set of protocols for apartment owners and managers, and they told them all after the ordinance passed, but then I always knew whenever someone violated, because they would call the police, and suddenly the police would go and demand from the landlord, this is a checklist of things that are on your plate that you do before we come in. So they would check for signage, and they would check for the warning letters that are sent out, and they check for notices and all these things. Because then the landlords would call us up at the Lung Association and say, do you have any free signs? Do you have any sample letters? Which we were offering all along, but this is how people act, right? So why not establish something like that for the homeowner associations?
If I may, I just want to address the enforcement issue. The ordinance does have enforcement provisions. It talks about what happens if there's a violation. The details about what's going to happen, of where do you make a complaint, what happens when you make a complaint, all of those details, the Department of Health and staff would come back when we come back for the first reading and work that out through. Tamika and I were discussing kind of what form that would take, but an MOU maybe, somewhere where it's documented, but the enforcement strategy would be specific to Department of Health. If for some reason we weren't going to partner with them, we wouldn't want to have to go back and change our ordinance. So the enforcement provisions are there, what we need to cite people, and then kind of the mechanics of outreach and education would be in some other written document that would come to the council.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Just one last comment on this, and sometimes doing the right thing is complicated, and there's some percentage, I think it was about 12% of Alameda County smokes, and I think there's a huge overlap between socioeconomic status and mental health challenges, substance abuse, addictive personalities. And so my comment is simply that while enacting this ordinance is going to be the right thing and something I fully support, I do want to acknowledge the group that we're impacting tend to be the least mobile tend to have the least option. You know, I own a single-family home. I have the privilege of being able to still smoke in it if I ever smoke. And I just don't want to do this without actually acknowledging that I know that this is happening, and that the people that we're impacting in their real lives are out there. I really appreciate the comment about Hayward's sidewalk enforcement as a way to pick on people, and so I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that before we move on. So thank you.
I have a couple just real quick questions looking at this. I noticed we prohibit tobacco vending machines. Did we, I think the only one I know of in the city of Emeryville is in the Oaks Club. So is this going to require them to get rid of it?
They were gone a long time ago. Do they still exist?
I think there's one left in the city of Emeryville, and I believe it is.
Prohibition that was a carryover from the prior ordinance.
Were they grandfathered in?
Not that I'm aware of.
No? Okay, I will double check my information on that. And then my other one was just the 1,000 feet, within 1,000 feet of his school. Is that existing, the 1,000-foot radius issue for tobacco sales?
Yes.
Okay, so, because my question was going to be, do we have any smoke shops on San Pablo that are going to get snared by that? Okay. Just wanted to make sure we notified people if we did.
Is that it?
I just wanted to ask additionally, does the council have any interest in prohibitions on flavored tobacco products?
Yes.
You do?
Absolutely.
I personally find smoking very vile, and I serve as the chair to the Healthy Homes Department for the county on behalf of the council here, and we examine household toxins and impacts of toxics inside household environments and how they're introduced to those environments. And I've learned everything about how costume jewelry is covered in lead paint to the fact that they now market flavored and scented cigarettes that smell like bubble gum and candy, and they're placed even to the point where they're placed on the lowest shelf on shelves in stores so that kids smell them and see them as they walk by, and they have cool wrapping. And I know that a couple other cities in Alameda County are currently executing flavored tobacco product bans, and I know that's not the scope of this ordinance. This is a smoking ordinance. But if people are interested in it, I would be interested in banning the sale of products that are clearly designed to target children. I think that's inappropriate. So I'm just curious if others feel the same way or not.
Yeah.
I honestly thought it was already illegal to target children with advertising.
Advertising, but not the actual creation of the product. So the product, kids walk through a grocery store or by the front of a store, and it's basically the new way that they're trying to solicit young smokers.
Okay.
So does the public health department have any additional input or feedback you want to add on that? You probably know more. Do you know more about the issue? Do you have anything you would add? You know more about it than I do.
So you're right. Actually, last night, the city of San Leandro, where I live, passed a flavored tobacco ban. They're going to come back and look at banning menthol cigarettes, which is the biggest flavor. So I'm happy to talk to the council about a tobacco retailer license, which is where the prohibition of products would go under a retail ordinance like that. But I have lots of fact sheets. I have lots of information to share about the targeting of the industry to not just children, but LGBTQIA youth and adults. Yeah, huge consumers of flavored tobacco products and menthol, as well as people of color and low-income folks. So I'm happy to share that with you. I don't know if it fits with today.
It doesn't. We're on the subject of smoking regulations, so I just wondered if people were interested in the issue or not.
And Oakland, of course, passed a flavored ban, including menthol cigarettes, except for adult-only shops. And San Francisco banned all flavored tobacco products citywide and don't have an exemption. So it's a pattern as well. So
Thanks.
I'm happy to work with the council and the city attorney on such a measure if you're interested. Sure.
I'm definitely open to looking at that in the future as a separate issue.
Yeah, not urgent, just something
Totally
to talk
open
about.
to it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this concludes the study session. Ooh, doggy.
have one, is it's 21.
Okay, I'm calling to order the
21.
successor agency regular meeting. Do we need to do a roll call?
Council is all still here.
Okay, public comment for the consent agenda or items not on the agenda for the successor agency. Mr. Carpio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio. I missed the first part of the study session and always had a question in which I wasn't able to ask. The smoking stuff there, is it strictly for cigarette or other smoking product like cannabis or whatever, weed? I mean, I don't know. Who smoke here weed? I don't, but do you smoke weed? I mean, are you going to forbid yourself to... I mean, you look like you smoke weed. You know, I saw you like that. And so, are you going to forbid yourself? I mean, if something is wrong here, you know, if you smoke, no smoking is for everybody and bust everybody in town, you know, including you. Thank you.
I don't think we ever respond to that.
Okay, any other public comments? Would someone, any ex parte communications about the successor agency?
Nope.
Would someone consider approving
I will move the consent calendar first.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowders, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. That concludes the successor agency meeting. Now we're on to the regular city council meeting.
I don't need my...
Okay, we have a call to order, which starts with an oath and a song.
I, Diane Martinez, solemnly pledge that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California as I discharge my duties as a city council member for the city of Emeryville. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island. From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Oh, hi, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, do I have an approval of the final agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we would just adjourn tonight's meeting in the memory of the victims of the shooting in Las Vegas. And with that, I would move the approval of the final agenda.
Is there a second for that motion?
A friendly amendment to this. I've been thinking about this for a while. I was wondering if we were going to have a suggestion for a moment of silence, which is what I was more prepared for to talk about. The time is not to be silent, and I am not patient with I don't want to use the word death of gun control in this country, but the fact that these are becoming more and more normalized. And so I just want to make sure that if we close in memory of them, that we actually do something to make sure that we're not just saying, oh, we're going to remember these people as well, because we're having to do this way too often, and I don't want to be silent on it. So with that, I will second the motion.
And I will accept your amendment.
Not sure I even made one, but yep.
Moved by Councilmember Martinez, seconded by Councilmember Pats, to approve the final agenda with the adjourn in memory as noted. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Okay, we have some proclamations. 4.1, this is a proclamation, National Coming Out Day, October 11th, 2017. Whereas on October 11th, 1987, 500,000 people marched on Washington, D.C. in support of gay rights, creating a national movement around raising awareness of LGBT people in communities across the United States. Whereas National Coming Out Day was founded on October 11th, 1988, the first anniversary of the 1987 March on Washington by Robert Eichberg and Jean O'Leary. And whereas the purpose of National Coming Out Day is to make people aware that people they know already, respect, love, work with, and live near happen to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And whereas the city of Emeryville supports a community where all people can live their lives being true to themselves in an accepting and inclusive environment, free of prejudice and hate. And now, therefore, it be resolved that the City Council of the City of Emeryville does hereby proclaim October 11th, 2017 as National Coming Out Day in the City of Emeryville. And be it further resolved that the City Council of the City of Emeryville does hereby encourage its lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender residents to be out and proud in our community, and for all residents to show support and inclusion for one another. Proclaim this third day of October 2017 at a regular council meeting of the City Council by the Mayor of the City of Emeryville. Want to say something about this?
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting this proclamation on the agenda, and I regret that someone who was intending to come receive this tonight had a family situation and is not available. I want to take a minute and actually speak to the importance of this day. To me, as an LGBT person, this is the most important day in the LGBT calendar. And a couple people in this room know my personal story about this, but over 20 years ago, at a time when I thought about coming out, there was a student in my rural high school who identified publicly as bisexual. And we went to gym class one day, and we changed into gym uniforms, and when we returned from gym class, he couldn't find his. And it was found in a toilet, and someone took a dump in the toilet on his clothes and left a gay epithet in his locker. And we were all lined up in the gym in the school for the rest of the day as school administrators tried to determine who had done this to him. And we could all see through the picture window into the office him crying. And his mother had to come to school to bring him a uniform. And I went home that night worried that he would kill himself. A student I didn't know. I was very worried. And I wish I had had the courage to be out to support him. And so it is very important that we promote this and that we encourage people who identify as LGBT to be out in their community. And there's a lot of things people can do. I have passed out more safe space stickers than I can count in 23 years, and support and promote the emotional and mental well-being of people in your community who are gay. And so thank you for putting this on the agenda.
Thank you for sharing your story with us.
The next proclamation is related to the story you just told. Bullying Prevention Month, October 2017. Freedom from Workplace Bullies Week, October 15th through 21st, 2017. Unity Day, October 25th, 2017. Whereas the month of October is observed as Bullying Prevention Month, and whereas the city of Emeryville is dedicated to promoting the social and economic well-being of its citizens, employees, and employers which depend upon the existence of healthy and productive employees working in abuse-free work environments. And whereas Unity Day is an annual event that participants joining together nationwide to unite in the commitment to stop tolerating bullying, now therefore be it resolved that the city of Emeryville, the City Council of the City of Emeryville during this Bullying Prevention Month does hereby proclaim October 15th through 21st, 2017 as Freedom from Workplace Bullies Week, and commends the California Healthy Workplace Advocates and the Workplace Bullying Institute, which raises awareness of the impacts of and the solutions for workplace bullying in the United States, and be it further resolved that the City Council of the City of Emeryville hereby also proclaims October 25th, 2017 as Unity Day in Emeryville, and encourages all residents to pause and reflect and to join together in evolving the state of humankind, promoting respect, compassion, and goodwill in our world. Proclaimed this third day of October 17th at a regular City Council meeting by the Mayor of the City of Emeryville.
Public comment on 4.2.
Okay.
Okay, I think that I welcome this resolution on bullying, and I think the resolution didn't define the word bully, so here I'll read it, the definition. A bully is a person who uses strength or power to harm or intimidate those who are weaker. So a bully is not just a mean person or a person that harms people. It's a critical element. That's got to be the harming people that are weaker than the person. That's a bully. That's a critical element. It's got to be a weaker person. So it's a strong person or a powerful person harming or intimidating a weaker person. That's the critical element for the word bully. One of the whereases here, it says, bullying can be identified and acknowledged and prevented by joining together. I'm talking about workplace bullying. Okay, so I would like here and now to support the teachers, pardon me, at Emory Unified School District, who have almost 50% of them have identified the superintendent of the schools, John Rubio, as a bully. They have collectively said very verbally and in writing that the superintendent has been bullying them. It's a culture of bullying installed at the Emory Unified School District, which is a highly dysfunctional place here in Emeryville. They have identified the superintendent as a bully and that he has been bullying them, they've been saying. So I'm here to speak their truth, the teacher's truth, because they're not here. So perhaps a copy of this could be sent to the superintendent, maybe, just so you know, we are concerned about bullying here in the city of Emeryville. Perhaps maybe you could, because it says we're supposed to identify bullies, and so I'm identifying him here right now, publicly witnessing this, and maybe you should help with it in this regard. And then one last thing I wanted to say about this subject is that people throw the word bully around a lot, and the superintendent has accused me of bullying him. But, if you look at the definition of the word, that's impossible. Somebody like me that's weak can't bully somebody like him that's strong, and he's the superintendent, and I'm just a parent. But I can speak truth to power. That's the opposite of bullying. So I am sometimes mean to people in the elite, people that are more powerful than me, but that's not a bully. That's speaking truth to power. So let's make sure that we're very clear about that. And I would like to, once again, reiterate, the superintendent of the schools has been identified by the teachers, not by me, by the teachers as a bully. Thank you very much.
Our final proclamation, 4.3. Domestic Violence Awareness Month, October 2017. Whereas domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior that a person uses against an intimate or former partner, using fear and intimidation to gain power over another person. And whereas domestic violence remains a devastating public health crisis, when 1 in 4 women will be physically or sexually assaulted by a partner at some point in their lifetime. And whereas the problem of domestic violence is not confined to any group or groups of people, but rather crosses all economic, racial, gender, educational, religious, and societal barriers, and is sustained by societal indifference. And whereas the organization A Safe Place has served victims of domestic violence in Alameda County for over 35 years, and whereas Alameda County Domestic Violence Service Advocates provides more than 45,000 client services annually. Now, therefore, I, Scott Donahue, Mayor of the City of Emeryville, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim October 2017 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the City of Emeryville, and we stand together to protect survivors, bring offenders to justice, and highlight the importance of combating domestic violence in our community, and to help build a culture of safety and support for all those affected. Proclaim this third day, October 7th, 2017, at a regular City Council meeting by the Mayor of the City of Emeryville. Is there someone here to speak, to receive this?
My name is Inesa Mathis. I am the shelter manager for A Safe Place, and we definitely appreciate the proclamation. Appreciate you just recognizing the work that we do. It is a work, and it definitely takes a very unique individual to do this work, and we appreciate just the opportunity to be here to receive this on behalf of A Safe Place.
Well, thank you for coming to receive
Thank
this.
you for having me.
On the other side.
It's this one over here.
Okay.
He has one for you. Bottom one.
Did you sign it? Thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
Announcement of commission and committee vacancies.
Mayor and Council, tonight I just have the same vacancy to report. The business representative with the term ending on June 30th of 2019 for the Public Art Committee. We have opened an application process. The deadline is November 3rd to submit applications, and the appointment will occur later that month. It's currently set for November 21st, but we're trying to set that meeting aside to make a shorter meeting, so the date may move, but at this point, the deadline is definitely November 3rd to submit applications.
Thank you. Any council member special announcements? Public comment for consent agenda items or items not on the agenda.
Some months back, I gave the city of Emeryville a gift of a flag. It was a Black Lives Matter flag. And and I said I would like to see this flag fly over City Hall occasionally, because I think it reflects Emeryville values. I think that people here in Emeryville think that Black Lives Matter. And so I gave this gift to the city of Emeryville. I presented it to the city clerk for you to fly, and you haven't flown it, and I haven't heard if you intend on flying it, and it's starting to seem like you don't intend on flying the flag. And so if you don't want to fly the flag, as I'll say again now, as I said 2 weeks ago, if you don't want to use my gift, I want the flag back, because I'll use it. If you're going to fly the flag, please keep the gift. If you're not going to do it, I want it back. So could you please direct Ms. Hartz, the city clerk, to either give me the flag back or decide among yourselves to keep it and therefore fly it. So could you please make that decision, like ASAP, please? I want my flag back if you're not going to use it. And could you please direct the city clerk to inform me about your decision? ASAP, please. Thank you.
Any other public comment? City manager report.
No report this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Ex parte communications.
I received comment from both the California Retailers Association and CPD and ACE.
And eBase
And
as well.
eBase.
I received the same emails.
I received the same emails.
As did I.
As did I, and I just want to make everyone aware of a unique situation. A prominent member of eBase, their child and my son both attend the same school or on the same soccer team. Because it involves a child, I'm not going to name them, but I don't want people to think we're having conversations. We limit that to school and soccer conversations, but I just want it to be very clear and transparent that we happen to attend the same school and therefore we're placed on the same soccer team and seeing each other in that capacity. That's the only place I thought that might fit. So.
Will you come to the consent calendar? Do I have a motion?
I have just two changes I noticed. Well, two changes, and then I would like to just ask a couple of questions on one item. On item 10.3, the minutes from the council regular meeting for the 19th, there's two mistakes I would like to amend. One is item 2 appears twice in the agenda. It comes again after item 5. Second is that in item 13.2, it is listed as the county supervisor's health care meeting. It's actually the health committee meeting.
Okay.
So those are the only two changes. But with those changes, and then I just had a question on 7. I don't need to pull it unless folks would rather me pull it to ask the city manager questions about numbers 10.7.
Why don't you ask the question? Oh.
If you're going to discuss it, I would prefer that
Okay,
you
then
vote,
I will.
please.
Will you amend your motion?
Yeah, I'll amend my motion and move the consent with the exception of item 10.7.
And with the amendments listed, yes, I second the motion.
Moved by Councilmember Pats, seconded by Vice Mayor Bowders, pulling item 10.7 for separate consideration to approve the consent calendar. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue?
Aye.
Thank you. My only item on 10.7, I just want to be clear and tie this back to the budget. So the city's budget contemplates $120,000 for fiscal year 17-18 for a library. We also made a allocation of unspent one-time general funds to be put aside to assist with library facilitation. I just want to get a confirmation from the city manager. The staff report indicates mid-2018 is when a library that we would be doing in partnership with the school district, hopefully, would be up and online. And I know that when we reviewed this during the budget, there was a potentially earlier time frame discussed, and I understand that we made other changes in the budget related to staffing and capacity. But I just want confirmation that we are very sure that before the end of this current fiscal year, we expect that we can have this taken care of. Is that still we expect it?
I think that that would be a reasonable expectation. Certainly, we are, as we delve into the legal provisions, it will either be a much simpler or a bit more arduous proposition. However, it appears to us that this would be doable for 2018.
Okay.
We're kind of excited about it.
I am too, and I just, I raised it only because I noticed that change in the estimated timeline, and as we discussed the budget, I just want to be clear because we budgeted around it being resolved in this fiscal year, and so my hope is that we keep that in mind so we don't have unintended budget consequences in the next fiscal year because of it. That was my only, I just wanted that clarification. I appreciate your response and your work on that, and Cindy Montero's as well.
Sure.
Are you going to move the item?
I think I have to technically let the mayor decide if he wants to take public comment.
I see public comment. Mr. Carpio, do you have public comment on 10.7? Okay.
I want to bring to your attention the subject of library. Library is a building where there is lots of books and all that, but this is really off time. You know, library are outdated. You know, nobody reads anymore. Everybody is watching TV or monitor on computer. So why do we have library? I mean, you know, I would rather have a workshop with tools where people could come and get tools to do whatever they need to do. But the library is absolutely useless, pointless. I mean, it's really outdated. I mean, we should turn the page on library and use the building library to house the homeless or make something out of it, something that is practical. Because anytime you walk into a library, I mean, those books, they stay there. This is a hazard to life. I mean, you know, if somebody is there when there is an earthquake, they could get killed for those books, you know. I mean, there is thousands of them, never open. Same thing at UC Library. I mean, I've been there and many times, and it's just books and books and books, and they get rid of books as soon as the new one comes. So it's really a waste of money, really. I mean, you really should think about it, you know. We should not going backward. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowder, seconded by Councilmember Pats. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Action items 12.1. Introduction and first reading of an ordinance. The City Council of Emeryville of the City of Emeryville's amending Chapter 39 of Title 5 of the Emeryville Municipal Code Fair Work Week Standards.
Good evening, council members, Mayor Donahue. Let me just get rid of this. I always lose that. It's
The top tab slideshow.
is it up here?
Center.
Why can't I ever find it? Oh, here. Okay, thanks.
Got you.
Okay, so tonight is the first reading for the amended ordinance for the Fair Work Week employment standards and consideration for the draft regulations. Oops. Oh. Now what did I do? Okay. So staff recommends that the council first adopt the first reading of the Fair Workweek ordinance amendments that we'll go over tonight and provide direction on the draft regulations. Again, background, some highlights include our ordinance was adopted November 1st, 2016. It became effective July 1st, and at which time now we're in a soft launch period. Outreach by Mills College to all stakeholders occurred in June. Draft regulations were posted in on June 26th. We held public forums, and a comment period happened between July 15th and July 31st. Final draft regulations were developed. In our last council meeting on September 5th, you all reviewed the regulations and requested that staff comes back with an amended ordinance as well as some modifications to the regulations. Timeline here, I just highlighted the slight modifications to the timeline, which would be tonight's meeting for the first reading, October 17th, the second reading of the amended ordinance and adoption of the regulations, and November 16th would be the effective date if everything goes as planned. So our discussion tonight would include you all reviewing attachment 1 and 2, attachment 1 being an amended ordinance, and and attachment 2 is a red line of the final draft regulations. We hope that by on our October 17th meeting during the second reading, we can go ahead and have the regulations finalized and adopted as well. So I could go through the whole presentation, or we can go piece by piece, because basically the way that it's set up, I present the question again that we discussed at our last meeting, and then I included on here the selection you made or the comments, and then what modifications were made in the documents. So it's kind of up to you if you want to.
I'd say go ahead.
That makes sense. Just go piece by piece and discuss it. Okay. So the first question was, should an employee's regular rate of pay include commissions? And we provided options A and B, and the decision at that time was that the regular rate of pay should include commissions and be consistent with overtime calculations. So option A was included in the regulations, and option D was deleted. So any comments about that change?
Well, we're going to take questions. We're not going to give comments. We're going to do questions, right? We have questions about it.
No questions?
No clarifying questions.
Okay. And question 2 was, should there be a grace period before covered employers would be obligated to pay predictability pay to an employee who clocks out after the scheduled end of his or her shift? And we provided options there, and option D allowed for an unlimited grace period for to complete a transaction for a commission or a tip, and option E provided a limited grace period for the shift transition. So basically, we said no predictability pay is owed for certain situations to accommodate transition in shifts, and when an employee either begins or ends a shift within 10 minutes of the shift, there would be no predictability pay. And when an employee works late to complete a transaction to receive a commission or a tip. So that change was made in the ordinance, and there was an addition to subsection 5A-B to section 5-3904D. Any questions about that change? Nope. question 3, should the regulation clarify that if an employee voluntarily initiates a request to end a shift early and a covered employer agrees to the request, the employee is not entitled to predictability pay? Council's comment: if an employee voluntarily initiates a request to end a shift early, this is an employee-initiated schedule change, and therefore the employee is not entitled to predictability pay. So therefore, that change is reflected in the proposed ordinance and adding subsection 6 to section 5-3904D as well. So option F is deleted from the regulation, and an example has been added to regulation 4E. Any questions on that one? No. Okay, question 4, should employee acceptance be required in order to modify his or her schedule, except for a modification that results in a reduction of hours? And the options were option G should be deleted. Option G should be included, and if no, option G should be deleted, and an FAQ will be developed to inform employers that the employee must accept reduction in hours. So the selection was option G: employers must obtain employee acceptance of modification of his or her schedule, except for modifications that result in a reduction of hours, provided by the covered employer complies with all other aspects of the ordinance. So option G will be included in the regulations and no amendments to the ordinance. Any questions? Okay. This question 5 was split in two because they're really two different issues. Should there be an exception to predictability pay for disciplinary reasons? The decision was employees will still be owed predictability pay when a shift is ended due to disciplinary reasons. So option H has been deleted from the regulations, and predictability pay again will be due for schedule changes resulting from disciplinary reasons. So no amendment to the ordinance for that. No questions? 5B, should there be an exception to predictability pay for when overtime is paid? And the decision was that covered employers should pay either predictability pay or overtime, whichever is greater. So this change was reflected in the ordinance in subsection 7 to section 5-3904D of the ordinance to clarify the interaction between overtime and predictability pay. Options I and K have been deleted from the regulations. Any questions on that one? Okay, offer of work to existing employees. Question 6 was, should an employee be entitled to predictability pay if the employee accepts additional work with less than 14 days notice prior to the shift? The selection was option J: employees are entitled to predictability pay if the employee accepts additional work with less than 14 days notice. So option J is included in the regulations and no amendments to the ordinance on that one. No questions? This is too good to be true. Okay, offer of hours. This was kind of like a general comment regarding acceptance of shifts in reasonable increments. So I think a recommendation was made to look at what San Francisco is doing. And once staff looked at the regulations again, it just seemed like there was some confusion around the examples provided, but there was already a certain amount of minimum hours required in the regulation. So what I think Andrea just simply removed those examples from the regulations and we'll just include it in the FAQ document. But the minimum hours, I believe, is 4 hours minimum to be accepted, and that's pretty much what San Francisco is doing.
So I have one question. Ta-da, I have a question. So it's the language that's in the regulations, do you know where that came from? Is it derived from San Francisco's
Exactly
regulations?
from San
It's
Francisco,
exactly,
and the names were just different.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to this one later because I have a further discussion I'd like to have around this page 8 of the regulations.
And I think that's it, actually, so.
So, do we take public comment now?
Sure.
We have someone filled out a card. Ms. Minetti is theoretically first. She has her card in.
Hi, good evening, council members. Mr. Mayor, Angie Minetti with the California Retailers Association. First and foremost, thank you so much for all of the extensive work that you and your staff has put into the amendments of the ordinance and then also the regulations. I think it provides much more clarity and also consistency with what San Francisco has passed and Seattle as well. 2 recommendations that I wanted to bring to your attention. In the regulations, there is some guidance that speaks to employee initiated shift changes and prohibits employers from asking for any volunteers to leave a shift early. And so whenever an employer initiates that type of conversation, automatically it triggers predictability pay. When we look at San Francisco and what they've done is essentially employer initiated is classified as whatever employers require. So if an employer requires an individual to leave early, that would be a scenario which would trigger predictability pay. And what typically happens is when business is slow and employees have been already scheduled for a certain amount of shifts, and let's say there's 3 hours left in a shift, if for whatever reason there's just no reason to keep them on board, they may leave early, or we would say who would like to volunteer to leave early and are still compensated for the rest of the shift. And so that's really what the rule provides for. So I think from our perspective, you know, having this type of guidance in there would preclude employers from wanting to even offer that type of opportunity for employees to leave early and still get compensated for the rest of their shifts, because any ask initiated by the employer would trigger predictability pay. And so I will say that under that type of guidance in the regulation, employers probably won't offer those types of opportunities irrespective of the fact that employees may still be compensated for the rest of their shifts. So I would ask the council to maybe take a closer look at that rule so that at least employers may offer employees the opportunity to leave early as long as their shifts that they had been scheduled for are still compensated. And I think that strikes a good balance and also preserves some of the flexibility that employees are attracted to when they work in the retail industry. And then last, still another petition for an exemption for disciplinary action. I know there was some concern over the city getting involved in adjudicating these types of matters and trying to determine what is classified as a disciplinary action. Also, again, in San Francisco's rules, there's a lot of definitions there that talk about coercion, that talk about adverse employment action. And even in Seattle, they also require employers to provide supporting documentation that speak to the nature of the disciplinary action. I say this because there are some scenarios where even for public safety reasons, employers may have to initiate disciplinary action. So for those purposes, we think that an exemption is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Kimura. I'm an attorney. I represent employers who work in Emeryville. And I just had a few questions, and I asked for some clarification on some of the provisions in the ordinance and the regulation. One of them is in Section 3 of the code concerning advance notice of work schedules. It says that a good faith estimate of an employee's work schedule includes an estimate that is a reasonable prediction based on forecast prior hours worked, by a similarly situated employee. But it doesn't say, I mean, employee's work schedule is a capitalized word, and as attorneys, they're usually defined terms, and employee's work schedule is not defined, so it's uncertain what period of time the good faith estimate of the work schedule has to be. So there's some uncertainty as to that. Is it a week, 2 weeks, a quarter? How much of the work schedule has to be estimated for each employee? So that was one question, and the other one was just a clarification on one of the examples in the amendment. There was an example of the grace period being 10 minutes for workers who need to finish their work or transaction, but does it also contemplate a 10-minute grace period for employees who just simply fail to clock out for 10 minutes or 15 minutes? Is that also including the grace period? Not just completing work, but just forgetting or failing to clock out. So those are the two questions that I would ask for clarification. Thank you.
Andre, Mr. Carpro, do you have comments?
There is several aspects that I like to talk to, but I'm going to bring only one that concerns employee and employer, but mainly employee. It's first, I want to be sure that we are talking about the same item that you voted $500,000 to make it going. Is it true? Mills College, in which Mills College, I have already mentioned that they are very bad in civil rights, in the treatment of their teaching staff, and I was opposing that. But anyway, you gave them $500,000 to get going. So, and to me, this fair 4 week there, it's a duplication of the Department of Employment in San Francisco, the main office, San Francisco. But it's okay if you want to run a side ship. Why not? But the main problem I see here, the wording is very complicated, and most employee today, they just not that familiar with all the language, the semantic, especially foreigner. They come here, they want a job, and next thing you know, they're confronted with all these regulations there, and somebody wants to protect them, and they get confused. They don't know. I mean, you talk about any people who come from South America about regulation and fair employment. They don't know. All they want to know if they can work and if they will get paid. The rest, well, they work the detail. But and then. The third thing that is the most important here, this Fair Work Week, if there is a litigation, the court will not enforce it. That I know by experience. They will stay away. They will say, it's unfair, whatever you want to call it. You deserve back pay and all that, but you never get a dime. The attorney will get paid, but the victim will not. So that's my observation, experience. Thank you.
Seeing no further comment, some discussion?
So I did have one question on the regulations on page 8. I know that we struck some examples to be placed into an FAQ, but in that first paragraph on this page,
is this the red line or the?
This is the red line of the regulations. let's see, that first complete sentence. If no single part-time employee is available to work for the entire portion of the additional hours, the covered employer must allow the existing part-time employee to work a portion of the additional hours so long as, parentheses, 1, the total number of additional hours for which the part-time employee is scheduled is more than 4 consecutive hours, and 2, the remainder of the additional hours that the part-time employee cannot work is not less than 4 consecutive hours. So I understand what this is getting at, but I'm just wondering if this should, for the first part, if the total number of additional hours for which the part-time employee is scheduled is 4 equal to or more than 4 hours. I don't know if I'm making myself clear with what because maybe I'm reading this incorrectly, but it sounds like, what we talked about last time is breaking up shifts. Like, let's say if a normal shift was 8 hours, and offering additional work would provide an existing employee could do 4 hours of the work, and then that would leave another half shift for someone else to take on, either another employee or the employer would be able to bring on a new employee at that point. But I just wanted to make sure that, if we were dealing with an 8-hour shift, that employee, because the way it reads now is it needs to be more than 4 hours for the existing employee to be able to take that on. So equal to or more than 4 hours makes sense to me.
So you're just asking for making sure that the minimum threshold is 4 is
Yes.
clarified.
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And if this was taken from San Francisco, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't.
Oh, they had a typo elsewhere in their ordinance too. So
Okay.
you're not crazy.
So, but if that makes sense to everyone, then I'd like to make that change.
Yeah, so it should say employee is scheduled for 4 or more consecutive hours.
Yes.
That's basically the change.
That's what I was asking for. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, no, I support that.
Good catch.
Yeah, seems good.
I think the intention is clear, but
Yeah.
But on that-
exact wording of San Francisco's, because I have it here. So
Right.
It was kind of confusing.
So Diane alluded to something, though, that goes to this item that I just wanted to get clarity on. So these are the regulations, but you are drafting, like, the FAQs that have been in the staff reports from, like, San Francisco had a bunch of FAQs. Like, you're drafting an FAQ, but it doesn't have to go in the regulations, is what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so we are going to have all these examples and things that I see the other 2 cities doing that I think were really helpful for employees, and I just wanted to make sure when you struck them all out, my thought was, like, we're not losing these, are we? We're just putting them in a different place.
That's correct. What you're considering, right, the universe of documents that are going to be out there are going to be the ordinance itself and the regulations, which you're looking at tonight, and which you will be adopting. And then there will be an FAQ document which staff will be putting together administratively, which is supposed to be reflecting back the examples. Those are not going to be coming to you for approval. Those are going to be developed by staff on an administrative level, but they will be capturing some of these examples and these very things that we're talking about here.
I had only one item, and I know we discussed it, and I just wanted to revisit it because I spent some time thinking about reading the letters we received and looking at the refined language. And I want to thank staff for all the work you've done on this. This is not a small undertaking. You guys have done a fabulous job with this, and I want to thank Councilmember Martinez also for leading this thing through, because this is a significantly good thing. My only question was about it's in the rules. Let me find it. Oh, no, it's not. It's in the ordinance. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong document.
The red line you're looking at?
Let me just see here. So we have, so in the attachment 1, the ordinance number 6, so they added those bold underlined area. So employee voluntarily initiated shift modifications. So here's because I know that I heard again tonight the issue of request, like how do we prevent, which I think is the right thing we decided, how do we prevent people from being coerced or forced, like strongly suggested. I'm wondering if there's a way to balance this issue, because I started wondering how, like, an person in an enforcement position was going to be in a situation where if I'm the employer and you're the employee and you come up to me and say, my kid is really sick. I just got a text from my husband. My kid is really sick, blah, blah, blah. And I say, do you need to go home? Have I now implicated predictability pay, right? Like, that's the kind of concern I would have, is that did the employee really initiate that? Because she didn't ask for a request. She just said, my kid is sick. And so I'm just like struggling with this one component of it. And I'm wondering if there's a way to simply craft a very narrow exception where there's a clear, very clear, explicitly required verbiage that the employer would have to use to put something out there to let people know it's available to leave if you need to leave. So the employer has to say exactly a set of words. So it would help with enforcement, I would think, but it would also just really limit. You're smiling. I don't know.
I'm just thinking no.
But but that way it also helps with enforcement, because if the employer didn't say the magic words, almost, then it's like it didn't. Then it is then it is actually a request. Because I support the what we did last time, like making sure that the onus is on the employer not to go near this space. But I could just start thinking about how natural conversations happen. I just wonder how we avoid the pitfalls of who initiated it. And so I kind of feel like if the employer is like, has some clear language, like even if there's like a place behind the register or in the employee room where they can post a little pink sheet that says, shifts available or persons available to leave early today, just like so that somebody knows I have the ability to go ask without having to be, initiated in a dialogue. Like, I didn't go to a specific employee trying to send someone home or get so-and-so to leave. It's like in an objective space in a very narrowly tailored way. And so that was the thing I was trying to figure out how to balance. I don't know. I just open it up for discussion. That's the only thing I have about this that I'm nervous about.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, there could be, that could be part of the materials that we produce for employers. Like if there's a clear open space where all of people's rights are listed as well. If there was like
a spot on the board,
folks can go home now if they so chose. But see the manager.
Or maybe it could just be really emphatic. With full pay, would you like to leave early? Those are the only words.
Well, that's what I don't know what the words would be, but that's what I was thinking was like, could they say there's it exists right now to leave early with full pay, and just say that, like, they have to say that words, and that's the only thing they can say, and then a person, it's all voluntary, that whether anyone even takes them up on it. I'm just thinking like a really, like, not like we have to like document all these things that people say. I don't know, from enforcement, wouldn't you find that easier?
I like that you brought that up because it's a hot topic.
Yeah,
it came up a lot, and Seattle actually has good, clear examples if we want to look at theirs on how to tackle something like that. I don't know what.
Yeah. The attorney might not agree.
Yeah. I think that the ordinance provides the rule, and then the regulations include a provision as to this distinction between voluntary and coercion. And what you're raising are examples, and those are great to put in an FAQ, that as we get questions, we can add to the FAQ to provide guidance. Because in that situation, if let's say the employee comes up and says, I just got a call, my child is sick, and maybe they can't talk because they're so upset.
Right.
And the employer says, why don't you go home? Then...
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of thing I'm worried about, is the natural conversation.
There's so many hypotheticals, which is why these FAQs work really well, because they're at the staff level. So we can, if we get multiple questions on one topic, we can craft an FAQ to kind of cover everything. Or likewise, if we've drafted an FAQ, and let's say we get an additional question, maybe we can just tweak that one. It gives staff the flexibility to provide the direction to employers and employees as to what we think would warrant enforcement and what is acceptable under the ordinance.
So maybe under that, then it's not the ordinance that needs to change, but my question would then be, does the because I think the guidance we gave last time when you did all this extra work was, hey, the employer says anything, it's like off limits, right? And it feels more fluid the more I thought about it than that. And so I'm just wondering, do the regs we have now still allow you to put FAQs that say that, or do you need clearer direction so when you come back on the 17th, the reg makes it clear that there will be there's guidance as provided by FAQs or however to narrowly create that space, because I felt like the heart of what we said was no to any of that, and I feel like I'm trying to just figure out how do we make a safe space for that if that's what needs to be happening.
I think that, so for example, in the example you gave, the employer here wouldn't be initiating the communication. The employee has come up and said, my child is sick. And the employer has now engaged with the employee to find out what they need.
Right.
That's
What if I said to you, I'm having a bad day? I mean, a child being sick doesn't always necessarily require a person to go home. A person having a bad day, I've worked with lots of people who have bad days, doesn't require a person to go home. I could just simply say the weather is terrible outside. Does that mean that the employer can say, oh, do you want to go home? And that's now an employee-initiated inquiry. That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like it's such a murky area because we're just saying if we make it so black and white, who employer-initiated or employee-initiated, I feel like we're going to get stuck in this situation where employers are going to say, well, the employee came up to me and told me they're having a bad day, so I asked them if they wanted to go home. Now I'm being stuck with predictability pay, and I didn't think that was what was going to happen. And I could see an endless list of examples, so I'm just wondering, is there a way for us to better delineate this so that we don't have that problem? That's my ask. That's the only issue I have with this.
You brought up something that maybe, Andrea, you could do. What if the employer had a sign that said, going home early with pay is available? They're not initiating it, it's a sign.
Well, I think without pay.
Going home early with pay is available.
But without predictability.
Without predictability pay, he's saying.
Yeah,
the
without
regular
predictability pay. But that's posted sign that an employer, that was the example that John gave. What do you think, would that be employer initiated?
Well, it depends on what the council wants to make that. If the answer is no, they could put it up. I think there's an issue of implementation in that typically the employees are out on the floor helping customers, and so if you have it posted in a break room somewhere, they may not see it.
I'm sorry. I'm confused on this sending employees home early with full pay.
We do that no matter what. You get your full shift, you just don't get predictability pay though.
Okay. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
For some reason I had in my mind that the predictability pay was the remainder of your shift pay. So that's why.
It's an extra hour.
It's an extra hour on top. Okay. That's where I was.
That's why I'm thinking.
Yeah, so again, the sign in the break room or the secret way you let the employees know that they can go home early if they so choose, to me is we don't have any customers right now, right? Or you don't have any tasks to complete because we're slow. I kind of feel like that's the signal that, hey, I'm ready to, it's clearly slow, I'm ready to go home. And it's the same thing with the conversation of, I'm having a bad day or my child is sick. Oh, are you asking to go home early? No. Okay. And that resolves that. I'm not seeing this as I think that's the clear FAQ of employee says, I'm having a bad day, my child is sick, there's a baseball game on, and the question, I don't think at that point you're probing too much to say, oh, I'm sorry, are you asking to go home early because it's slow or what have you? I'm missing the...
So maybe it's employee initiated is what you're saying.
That just sounds employee initiated to me.
Let's keep it at that. Well, just have the FAQ questions.
Yeah.
Include that as an example. I don't know.
I would
have to know.
I would just say, the store is dead example you're using. The only reason I have issue with that example is, let's say that the store is dead and the 5 of us work there, okay? And we all kind of are wondering, the employer's not able to say anything like, by the way, if someone wants to leave and go home early, you can. I would be concerned as the employee that if I volunteer that and the employer, for whatever reason, I'm guessing the employer's mindset, if the employer doesn't want anyone to go home for some reason, that I am potentially sticking myself out there as I may be the least qualified or the least best employee because I'm looking to go home. So when the employer has future opportunities for work, I don't want to be branded or thought of as someone who always wants to go home early, because they may also then imply in their head, oh, this is the person who will probably also bag on the shift later. So that's the thing I'm worried about, is that that an employee won't, because an employee who had hourly jobs, I would be afraid to tell my employer, by the way, yeah, I've had a long week and I really want to go home. I would want to have some signal that, hey, it's okay to ask for it, because employers won't think of it the same way if they're looking to let someone go home anyway. Yeah. That's where I feel like it's.
And I totally hear that. I'm just thinking back to, and it has been a while, I'm old, since I've worked hourly retail type jobs. And I always knew the people who wanted to go home early. They were never shy about sharing that. That was, I have employees now who are hourly, and believe me, I know, when they want to go home early. It's not, I'm not seeing it as covert, and I hear that, but and again,
I'm just putting it out for discussion, and if nobody wants to take it up or do anything with it, that's fine. It was the one spot I felt like it could be discussed more, but that was it. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
Well, I'm interested to hear, do you think it's going to cause more city costs to have something like this?
I'm sorry, what exactly is this?
Do you think that if we had this as a part of it, like, the employer saying, without any loss of your regular pay, would you like to go home early?
I think with the statement, it's going to become a he said, she said. We're going to get the employer saying we said this. We're going to get the employee saying no. And so we're left with...
Aren't we going to have that anyway? And that's what we have now.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in here. Yes. Part of what you're talking about now are a number of potential scenarios out there, which, as we sit in this room right now, we will not be able to anticipate fully until we actually see the rollout and how it happens. I think that the best thing that we can do at this point is we can reflect back on what the policy decisions are of the council in relation to how employees are sent, can be asked to be excused early, and whether predictability pay is triggered under those circumstances. And then as we understand how these factual scenarios are being played out through our investigation and through the phone calls that we'll be having, I think we will be able to develop our FAQ sheet to be able to and provide the advice that will be consistent with the council direction. And if necessary, we can then come back to you to further refine these regulations. I understand what the council, I think, is trying to wrestle with in terms of trying to anticipate all the various factual scenarios. But I think that what we're presenting to you tonight is a reflection of the policy direction that you had given us previously. And I would recommend that you allow the process to happen, and we can always come back and update our documents based on the scenario on the ground that comes up once the rollout happens.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yes.
That it?
Do you need a motion?
So what I would ask for at this point is what you have before you tonight is the first reading of the ordinance, the amended ordinance, and the updated regulations. And so what I ask for first procedurally is that there be a motion on the first reading of the ordinance, and then you vote on that. And then if there's any further comments on the draft regulations, you can provide that to us. Otherwise, we will bring back the draft regulations with the one amendment on page 8 of 12 of the red line, that you had discussed regarding the additional hours, and we'll bring that to you in a final form at your next council meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Is this a motion to read by title only?
I'll make the motion to read by title only.
No, I'd like to hear every word of it.
I'll do that.
I'm joking.
Happened.
I will continue to second the motion as is.
You're about to sit here by yourself for a while.
Moved by Councilmember Martinez, seconded by Councilmember Medina to read the ordinance by title only. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending Section 5-39.04D of Chapter 39 of Title 5 of the Emeryville Municipal Code, Fair Workweek Employment Standards with a CEQA determination of exempt pursuant to CEQA Guidelines 15061 sub B3 and 15378 B2.
And then motion to adopt
The first reading,
the
yes,
first
please.
reading.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Martinez, seconded by Councilmember Medina to approve the introduction and first reading of the ordinance. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you. And so at your next council meeting, as I said, we'll bring back the second reading of the ordinance, and then we'll bring you the final of the regulations as well, and you'll be adopting the final regulations by resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, 12.2, resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending the regular meeting schedule of the Parks and Recreation Committee to the third Wednesday of every month at 5:30 p.m. and amending the year 2017-2018 local roster of boards, commissions, and committees accordingly.
I'd like to move approval.
Public
Sweet.
comment?
Public comment.
Oh.
You can still make a motion, that's fine.
Yeah, made a motion.
Okay, public comment?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, here we have a public comment.
You have a second over here on the motion.
Yeah, I'm going to second it.
Okay.
I guess a question that affects everybody, every taxpayer. Is this Fair Week thing still going to cost us more money? I mean, are we going to pay more than $500,000? I mean, is it legitimate that I ask for that? I mean, all this, it costs money on the staff, it costs money on everybody, and the question is not clear. As I said, if you present this to foreigners, they'll be in a bind. You know, and they, I mean, all these arguments about the little thing there, you know, I mean, disturbing.
Okay, so we got a motion and a second.
We had a motion by Councilmember Medina, seconded by Councilmember Pats to approve the resolution. Councilmember Martinez?
I just want to say, before I vote on this, that I wanted to thank the members of the Parks and Rec Committee for committing themselves to want to meet more frequently. I think they all deserve our gratitude for being so invested in our community, and I vote aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Hearing Member Martinez say that, my wife chairs this committee, so not super excited they're meeting more often, but I do have to go home to her later, so aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. 12.3, resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville appointing a City Council representative as member to the East Bay Bike Share Accessibility Technical Advisory Committee for the calendar year 2017, and amending the 2017 city roster of county and regional statewide bodies accordingly.
You're going to take public comment?
Public comment. Seeing none.
Do we have a member who wants to do this?
I'm happy to sit on that.
I would actually strongly endorse Councilmember Medina to do it. We're working on all this transportation stuff together, and she's phenomenal on this, so I'll make the motion.
I'll make the second.
I'll make a quick comment that the way I actually got my start in community activism is because my brother is severely physically disabled, and he was able to get a bike because his PTA at school fundraised for him to get an adapted bike. They cost about $3,000 to $4,000 depending on the requirements for adaptability. So any movement towards making these more accessible to a broader range of people is very near and dear to me, and this is a community that I started volunteering and organizing around. So I'd be really excited to actually do this work.
We're all excited to put you on
Yes,
that job.
thank you for doing it.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowder, seconded by Councilmember Pats to appoint Councilmember Medina to the position. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Communication and reports, department heads. Planning Director's report.
Yes, I have a report for you on the most recent Planning Commission meeting, which occurred last week on September 28th. There were 3 items on the agenda. Oh, first let me note that Commissioner Thompson had an excused absence, so there were 6 commissioners present. 3 items on the agenda. The second one, the Ocean View Townhomes, was continued to a future meeting, so that was not considered. On the first item, the Doyle Street Mews, the Planning Commission held a public hearing. You may recall that you had a study session on this project earlier in September, and the project does require City Council approval because it involves the demolition of existing residential units. So the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend City Council approval of this project, and that will be coming to you for a public hearing at your November 7th meeting. On the 5850 Shelmont Way mixed-use project, this is a new project proposed on the north side of Shelmont Way between Christie Avenue and Shelmont Street. Approximately 259 residential units and 10,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, a very large new project. This was a study session. There was a lot of discussion about the project. One of the key issues is that the general plan calls for Shelmont Way to be relocated about 250 feet to the north of where it is currently. That's got a long history to it. But this project would require a general plan amendment to not relocate Shelmont Way, basically to just leave it where it is. Of course, the general plan amendment requires City Council action. The project itself would not trigger City Council approval. However, any project on this site, regardless of whether it was this one or anything else, would require the same general plan amendment. So staff is considering bringing that general plan amendment to the Planning Commission and then City Council for action at a future meeting. And I would note that the Planning Commission unanimously expressed support for such a general plan amendment. The other interesting turn of events of this project was that this project was designed as a low-rise, meaning that the floor level of the top floor is not a high-rise, I should say. The floor level of the top floor is less than 75 feet above grade. At the end of the study session, after the Planning Commission made a number of comments and members of the public, the applicant said, you know, a lot of these issues could be resolved if this building were a high-rise that didn't occupy so much site area, was a taller and more slender building. And the Planning Commission, I think, fairly unanimously expressed support for that concept as well. So it looks like this project is going to change and evolve. It also looks like a general plan amendment will be heading your way for not relocating Shelmont Way. That concludes my report on the September 28th Planning Commission meeting. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
When the proposal to move Shelmont Way was made years ago, I take it had to do with circulation and getting more of a regular grid to our streets.
Right. There were a number of reasons. One was the circulation issues. Another was to create a larger development site to the south of Shelmont Way that could be assembled for development. But actually, this was part of the so-called Big Four traffic study. This was before any of you were on the council. It was about 10 years ago. But actually, the traffic consultant that looked at relocating Shelmont Way did not recommend in favor of it. mainly because the improvements in traffic generation were minimal and it would be very expensive to do. But it got into the general plan regardless, partly because it would have improved some of the traffic circulation for adjacent parcels, but also because of the potential to create that bigger redevelopment site. But then, since the redevelopment agency went away, the potential for assembling that site pretty much went away too. So there's not a lot of reason to move it anymore.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions? 3.2, council members reporting on meetings attended.
I just have one really brief thing, which I'll be bringing up at City Schools on Thursday. The Alameda County Healthy Homes Board, we received a report about a finding of lead at McClymonds High School in right across the border in Oakland, and it was determined that the source of the lead is it's going to sound crazy, it's the actual water fountains. The fixtures in the water fountains were made with lead. So the ECCL is a new structure, but I will be simply just giving this 2-minute report on Thursday because for Anna Yates and Ralph Hawley, to the extent that they're used, they're constructed in similar time periods. Just being aware of that because members of the football team at McClymonds High School were drinking it and reporting bad taste and things before it was tested, and now Oakland Unified School District is now testing all buildings built in that time period. So we don't have a large inventory of schools, but obviously children use 2 campuses we have that are from an older time period. So it involves pipe joint and water fountain head replacement. So, which to me is insane to think, but that's what's going on. So that's my update.
So I serve on the East Bay Community Energy, our CCA, and I just wanted to mention that our Citizens Advisory Committee will actually be taking their show on the road, and they will be here in Emeryville on the garden level on November 13th at 6:30 p.m. So if anyone wants to give input to that program, they would have the opportunity to attend that public meeting at that time, and I'd like to thank staff for facilitating that.
At the last council meeting, I talked about getting a MOU for a potential grant to enable us to make microgrids. The staff came back and I think wisely said that, well, they could do a letter of support. And Mr. John Cooper, who's got a company called Next Energy, went and met with several parties about having microgrids on some of our parking lot surfaces that would be assembled on existing parking lots that would generate electricity, put some of it in batteries, and be able to have EV charging. And then after meeting with Rich Robbins and Nathaniel Centeno at the Bay Street, basically John Cooper decided to not apply to the grant because he sees something else that is very interesting about Emeryville, that there are many of these parking lots, and that he doesn't need a grant, he believes, to come back and have our local businesses be interested in having some of these parking places get online to have this kind of structure on them, generating electricity that they can use that's not going into EV charging but would provide EV charging. So he will be coming back to our city, and the 2 developers were interested in the idea and suggested that he meet more of our businesses to get them into it, and he is interested in having our city be potentially the beginning of this kind of a business that would give us more EV chargers at no cost to us, and our local businesses would be in effect paying for it and amortizing it with power generated over time is the premise. And that the new East Bay Community Energy might be willing to pay a little bit more than PG&E for power put back on the grid, which might help this kind of business go forward, is the idea. So the businesses wouldn't just necessarily burn the energy themselves, they could, but it also could be made to be more local power for our city, depending upon what, if that were reached, the price point of that were reached, that would might affect how these were made in our city. So that's my report.
Mr. Mayor, we neglected to announce something at council announcements, and I'm wondering if I could make an announcement.
Yes.
The 31st annual Emeryville Celebration of the Arts opening night is this Friday. I feel bad that everyone's gone. We had a bunch of residents here, but it is this Friday. It is open to the public from 6 to 9 p.m. We got a venue like 6 days ago, but it is at 1475 66th Street, and that is the Emory Tech Building, and it is the entrance on 66 that's nearest to the train tracks. And for that night only, there is free parking in the Emory Tech garage for any resident or guest who wishes to visit. And yours truly will be managing the bar again this year, so come have a drink.
Okay. We have something more here. Sorry, let me
Future agenda requests?
yeah, future agenda requests.
So earlier this evening, Councilmember Pats talked about not wanting to stay silent on the issue of gun violence, and I agree with that. So if you would like to work together on a proclamation or resolution, I would
love to.
I would offer myself, and we will bring that back.
Support that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble here with the.
We're at adjournment.
Okay, we're at adjournment. This meeting's adjourned.